I think Josh drew the short straw there, didn't he? Aren't there some marvellous memory verses in that first 10 verses? Very meaningful. This is a message for anyone here this morning who wants to make sure that their life is meaningful and spent meaningfully. It's just profoundly full of theology, rich theological insights, and they're told in the framework of this incredible Boys' Own annual ripping yarn, which Abraham is the key figure, or is he? Let's just launch into this. It's fascinating that I find it fascinating. I'm interested in history. I'm interested in archaeology, and the places we're reading about are real to me for numerous reasons, and to lots of us, I'm sure, who understand where these are fitted into history later on. But here we have this time where what has happened is that you have a reason for a battle here. We have these areas where, let's see if I can do it. Is that visible? It's not the best map. I can't find decent maps these days, but basically we're dealing with the area over near Hebron, and the Oak of Mamre is just a few k's north of that. That's where Abraham's living. Remember, it's up on the heights of the Judean hills later on. It's crusty, windswept country, good for goats and others. But over on the right here, if you go up the King's Highway on the right side of the Jordan River, which is that little blue strip with two globs on the left, you go right up to the Euphrates and the Tigris. I remember Abraham had descended in from Haran a couple of weeks ago. Well, they don't have to go all that way up, but if you head across north of Hobah and just straight across, you end up down in Elam. And Elam is the dominant kingdom at the moment, and there is an alliance between Shinar, which is actually the Babylonian kingdom, another word for that kingdom, and these four kings over here, they're ruling the world at the moment, the known world, the civilised world, the cultured world. And you go up through here and you're into areas that's, the heart of learning and culture is that area there. And Elam is really like Iran today. It's that part of the world, and around into Iraq and Kuwait. That's this area here. And they were not Arabic peoples, they were Aryans. That's where the word Iran comes from. And they control this whole area right over to Egypt, and Egypt is pretty difficult to keep under control. And what has happened, as we read in the story, or was brilliantly read to us, that these little kingdoms down here in green, you can see you've got 5 little green words. You've got Sodom, Gomorrah, Zebim, Bala, Admah. They've decided that these guys are a long way away, and they've probably heard there's a bit of instability back in home court, and they decide not to pay their taxes. Now, we also think from other history that the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah that were on the highway were like brigand towns. Their economies were falling apart, and the whole social fabric was falling apart in this era. And they resorted, instead of producing their own wealth, as interrupting caravans that were coming from the centre of civilization all the way down to Egypt and back up and around the Silk Road and across into what would be today the Stans, Afghanistan, all that. And they're not producing their own wealth, they're just ripping off the king. So if Kedorlaomer, the leading guy over in Elam who dominates these other kings, if he doesn't nip this in the bud, well, basically he's putting out a signal, and a whole lot of other towns will join in the rip-off. You get the picture? He's got to call this one. And so they travel, the distance is about from Melbourne to almost Townsville, maybe to Brisbane if you could find a shortcut, and they come with thousands. Each of those kings had militias of thousands, and they would come across there And what they've done is, let me see if I can, this is not the best of map, but you can see the blue lines have come down, and they've come down town, city after city, and it takes a bit to carry enough food to feed tens of thousands of troops, and their horses, and their cattle that they have with them. It's a slow process moving through that. And so basically they thump town after town, Ashtaroth, all these famous towns. And they got on a roll, and they moved down, right down to Paran, and down the bottom up to number 4, Kadesh Barnea, which is famous in Saul's day. And then they come and they have this skirmish where the green section, it says Southern Kingdom. It's got the order a little bit wrong there. Basically they're just picking up supplies as they go and trashing these towns, putting them to the flame. That's the way kings exert a little bit of discipline. And let that be a lesson to you if you're another town and you're watching this. Now, Abram's up on the hill country, and he would have seen down in the Jordan Valley the dust that's connected with the rising up of 5 kings and all their militias, and he would have seen the smoke. You know what smoke travel's like. Even in Indonesia, if the wind's blowing the right way, when they burn their crops, we get the smoke. You know those days. And this is what is happening here. He's noticed all this smoke, and he's a spectator. But then all of a sudden, he ends up becoming a player rather than a spectator. So that's basically what is the... Whoops, go back. And the battle doesn't really go well for the 5. I mean, they're robbers and brigands. They're not really armed and trained militia. And they end up fighting at the south end. Let me go back. Just see the Dead Sea is a little bit of water in the middle. And down the bottom of that is this area called Siddim. I couldn't get a good shot at that. But that was, you see, they got the long part of the Dead Sea, and the southern bit, that little lump, that's actually a lot shallower. And remember, the Dead Sea is the deepest part on this planet. It's the lowest water that you can get anywhere, full of salts, sulphurous salts in particular. And the Hebrew for that is bitumen. That's where the word comes from, out of the Hebrew. And that lower section, geologically, right through the ages, there are whole periods where that is just crusty salt. It just disappears. It's like Lake Eyre, and people presume that that's its norm. And so they decide to basically, we think they're fighting on the bottom part of the Dead Sea here, where it's all crusty. And when you're fighting, you've got all there's dust everywhere, and you can hardly see. And then these kings are basically tripping over themselves. If you put your drone up, you probably wouldn't want to do it right at this minute. But if you put your drone over that area, you'd see these bitumen pits. They're still there. And not only that, but there's whole areas which are just crusted over, and they assumed that the whole thing was hard. But as they're fighting, many of the troops just fell through the surface into sulphurous materials, and they would just fall straight through. Done. They'd come to a sticky end, and that's what's happened. It's very evocative. It's very much what would happen in that sort of battle. This is the same area. Then this is from the Australian War Memorial. I just want to digress a little. But for many years, what happens is that people, and this distance, the scholastic sorts tend to say, oh, these are just stories, couldn't have happened, and then history repeats itself. And that's what happened in the First World War. What happened in Abram's day is that some straggler from this battle ends up making it all the way up into the Judean hills and comes to Mamre, where Abraham hears from this straggler that a man reported this to Abraham the Hebrew, that there's been this scattering of the 5 kings. It's interesting that the word Hebrew, important word here, it's not so much referring, like there weren't Hebrews at this stage. It really is a derogatory term, something, it's a bit of a slang. It would be more like the term, in our term, we'd call it bogan. Abram the bogan. And basically speaks a Creole version of the local language and mixed with a lot of Babylonian. That's really, he sounds a bit odd. And if you think of Abraham and he's got a good mullet and a flanny shirt and a fantastic socket set, you're probably getting it about right. And and he's out there on his veranda and front yard full of chariot parts, and that's how he is regarded. But he's also very wealthy. He's got a lot of goats, sheep, gold. And so he's made friends with a couple of people there near Mamre, and Mamre is also the man that the place is named after, and his brother Eshcol and Aner. And Abraham hears that his relative Lot is being taken captive. And it's fascinating that in the previous verse we read that Lot is not just living on the plains with his cattle. Guess where he lives? He's moved inside the city gates. He's a Sodomite now. He lives with the people of Sodom, and he has learned to adjust to their strange ways. It really is a story of one person becoming more of a person and the other becoming less of a man through this whole episode. So this is where we're at this stage. And Abram decides to do something about that. And it's not because he's a social justice warrior or he wants to go and, stop environmental degradation or something. He's concerned about his kith and kin. Lot is to Abraham is still family. Now, Lot might not behave like family. He's kicked against the goads. He's tried to become the self-made man, and it's starting to blow up in his face. But he's still family as far as Abram's concerned. And Abram hopes that if he can only redeem this guy, he might still enjoy the benefits of the promise that come by connecting with Abram. So he takes off. Now, Abraham takes off with 318 men after, you can imagine this slow-moving caravan that is moving on the soft soil right up the Jordan River on the right-hand side of the cliff face that is the high country. And they're moving up slowly, whereas he is at the high point and he thinks, we can pursue these guys. Now, he has obviously got his own security service here now because he's a very wealthy man. He needs it. This is the Wild West, folks. There is no United Nations. There is no big brother country to come in and fix things up. You have to look after yourself. And he's got his own little militia. And they're all armed, which tells you a bit about Abraham's wealth, because in these days the average family, probably 1 in 10 families could afford a sword, one sword. But he's got a whole armed militia, armed to the teeth. And they take off without, now I'm not sure how they travelled, probably not by foot, probably on mule, and he's travelling relatively generally downhill. And he knows that he could intercept these people up here. Here's a picture from the Australian War Memorial from the Damascus side entering into Tel Dan, or what's called the Barada Gorge. The Barada Gorge looks like that coming from the other side, the side that Abraham would have come on. You can see the high walls. That's not a very clear shot, but then cameras weren't really apples in those days. And here is an artist's impression of the Barada Gorge by George Lambert. He added his own flourishes to that previous picture. And if you've got really good eyesight, those things on the left, in the left corner, are actually Australian and New Zealand light horse troops, of which my grandpa was one of them. I like to think he's the guy on the... And they had the same odds in the First World War. On September the 30th, 1918, the light horse and an Australian machine gun troop were alerted that the Axis forces, the Turks and the German machine gunners, tried to escape from Damascus northward towards this, or northwest, through this, they would have had to travel through this gorge to get to Beirut and to the rest of their troops. And this battle was the battle that flipped and ended that campaign, the war. 20,000 Turkish troops travelled along, and it's a little bit difficult to see, but you've got a road, a railway, and then a river that you can't get across. And they are funnelled into this situation here. And the Australian offered them amnesty if they'd only surrender, and they refused, and they tried to fight, but they actually couldn't see the Australians they were shooting at by the time dawn came. Here's a picture after the battle. And you can see all that the 20,000 were carrying. There's no way they could turn around with that much and get out. And that's exactly, they couldn't get out of the Barada Gorge. And that's exactly what happens with Abraham's day. They've got tens of thousands of troops, and they've got whole cities of people out the front that they're pushing along who are going to be slaves, and all the goods and all their cattle. And you can just see what a little space they've got on that road. It's minuscule. I just think that's one of the most haunting pictures. And that's the next day after the battle. And then they bring back these people. You know, at 160 kilometres, they walk back, a whole people. Abram chases the rest of these people all the way to Damascus. He leaves them at Hobart, there's a modern Hobart, which is about 12 hours further north, but it's not that one. It's just, and Abraham then brings back all the people. Now, I find a lot of the religious art of the Romantic period quite poor when it captures this. This is from a guy, Jan Leukens, who is a lovely ink sketch drawer. And you notice the detail in this. If you can see it carefully, I'll just see I've got a larger version. Right in the middle, in that second row, there's a guy bending over. Can you see that? And there's another guy sort of doing this with a funny hat. And he's got, let's get a bit closer. There we go. And you see he's got his hands up and he's got a little tray with some nice refreshments on it. And that's Abraham in the middle, supposedly. But I think this guy actually got it. It would have been one thing, chaos. But you notice how many thousands of people there are. And in the Romanticists, you'd always say just, half a dozen people. They all look like Spaniards wearing curtains. And this is much more like what it would have been. And really a chaotic scene full of thousands of people. You get the idea? I hope this is... I find it interesting anyway. So, and then this is why the story was told. 2 kings appear on the scene. And Abraham does 2 really risky actions in this location with these 2 kings. The first king, Abraham, we read in verse 17, after he defeated Kedorlaomer and the kings allied with him, he came out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that's the king's valley. And then Melchizedek, king of Salem. Now Salem simply means peace. This guy was the king of a city called Peace. It was in the language of the locals, it was Uru Salem. But bogans like Abraham would run it together and say Jerusalem. This is the modern Jerusalem. And that's how Hebrew, but it's really city of peace. It was a holy city, people where pilgrims would go to. And this guy, fascinating, and in the New Testament, we haven't got time to deal with it, but he's a key figure in the book of Hebrews and playing off a psalm about him. But I want to look at who this guy is in the real, rather than how he is symbolically used in the New Testament. It's another sermon. But this guy comes out and he's quite phenomenal, and he brought out bread and wine. Why does he do that? That's how you make covenant with someone. And he wants to make a covenant with Abram. Why do you think he wants to make a covenant with Abram? Well, it's pretty obvious that his God must have had something to do with bringing peace. He's brought peace. This guy is right in the apple of that God's eye, and I want some of what he's got. And so he wants to bind himself and get some of that blessing. Now, I'm not sure if this guy was a total fake. We know that he didn't get his kingship through inheritance, but through an oracle that was said about him. It's a little bit like the start of Mormonism. One guy gets the oracle and the rest of the people go, wow, is that so? And that's the nature of this guy's kingship. It's a religious, priestly kingship. He's both priest and king in Jerusalem. And he brings out bread and wine. And then he blesses Abraham. And look at what he says in verse 19. He says, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth." 20. "And praise be to God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And then Abram does the weirdest thing. It's like festivities are on everywhere, but he leaves the change rooms and the team singing in the song, and he's got something more important to do. And he dashes outside and he just grabs a portion of the spoils. It's translated tithe. It just means a portion. There's no way he could have worked out an exact tenth, is there, in that chaos? He just grabs a portion. Who knows what it was? And he plunks it at the feet of this king priest, Melchizedek, whose name means Melech, king, Zedek, righteousness, king of righteousness. And that's Abraham acknowledges these words that this guy has said. Now, some people really get a bit, their toga in a knot over this, and they think, well, gosh, Abraham, isn't he a bit confused here? Isn't he undiscerning? Is he actually saying that this polytheistic pagan is on the money when it comes to his theology? Because it looks like that, doesn't it? As the untrained eye would think that was what is going on here. It looks like what they call syncretism, merging two religions together that are actually philosophically very different. It's actually a speech act that he's doing. He's saying something by his action. That's what Abraham is doing. We've got to look first of all at the positive aspect of what this guy is saying. He's saying something to Abraham which he has deduced. Remember, paganism is the theology of deduction. You infer backwards from the events to the powers of the God. That's how you do your theology. It's inference-based, deduction-based. And he knows that this guy is not a self-made man. 20,000 versus 318 aren't great odds. And this guy isn't brilliant. He's a bogan, but he's a blessed bogan. It's a good deduction, isn't it? And that's what he's come to. That Abram, really, this is a miracle. God must be on his side. And this is what he has deduced. And it's good theology. Melchizedek is speaking better than he knows. He worships God Most High. Now, we mustn't confuse that with the later titles that crop up in the book of Daniel. It's the first time people of faith use that phrase of God. His name is Yahweh, our God. He's the God, the I Am, the one who calls us to be. God Most High is a Canaanite God. It crops up again in Acts 14 when a demon-possessed girl uses that phrase of God. This is not a holy name. It simply means the boss cocky, the number one. And he has to be the creator. And this is the God of Melchizedek. It's not a God he knows. So what is Abraham doing here? He knows that Melchizedek is speaking better than he knows. Years ago, our church, when I was a pastor, had a mixed netball team. We used to play around at the new sports centre. And one night, having played, we came and I just noticed the dial on my petrol thing was low and I needed petrol. Pulled into the local nearest petrol station up in Dandenong Road and pulled in. And I looked up as I was shoving the thing in the side of the car from the Bowser and squirting the fuel in. I looked up and I could see this row of people going up to the cash register to pay. But the guy at the cash register, I kid you not, and I don't want to embarrass myself, but he was jiving as he is serving. Someone would ask for cigarettes and he'd go, phew. And I'm going, oh, goody, my kind of guy. Anyway, so I filled up my tank and went in, pulled out my wallet, and I walked in. I stood in the aisle and we walked all the way up. I got up and I don't know how he heard me because he was wearing headphones, but I sort of slowly said, Bowser number 6, sounds like. And anyway, he got it and he said, oh, that'll be such and such. And I opened my wallet. My Visa card wasn't there. Behind me, there's this row of people, and I'm feeling the heat as they're looking. I said, oh, I'm terribly sorry. I haven't got my Visa card. And he's going, oh. I said, do you want my address, my watch? I could promise you one of my children. What is it you want? And he said, oh, man, where do you live? And it's about 10 minutes away. I said, that's cool. Go and get it. That's cool. And he's just driving. Anyway, we had a little chat and, started on theology of all things. And he asked me, what do you do for a job? And I said, I'm a pastor at the church a couple of corners away that you might have seen. And it turned out he was an Israeli uni student working his way around Australia pumping gas. And he goes, what's it like being a pastor, man? And I said, well, I've got to say, it's the best job I've ever had. And he goes, and his face fell. Anyway, go and get your card. So off I went home, drove home, came home, went to the front door, and I said, I can't find can I borrow a Visa? And one of the family had borrowed the card to go shopping. Oh, sorry, terribly sorry. I said, oh, that's cool. And I took the card and I went back to the thing, and by then people had gone. It was just me and him. We got chatting, and I found out his mother was into this strange Jewish mysticism, and he didn't know what he believed, but he knew one thing, and he just said this one phrase, and I can still remember it. He said, if you really thought you were working for God, you couldn't call it a job. I had a Basil Fawlty moment. I didn't pay you to tell me to tell. And I knew. I came to speak to him the word of God, but I know that God had spoken to me. And God had said to me in no uncertain terms, it's not a job, it's a privilege. And I was thinking of taking a different job at that time. I had options. And the Lord, through that Israelite student, was saying, you move when I say go. You are conspicuous. Your thinking is conspicuous to me. You're transparent. I can read you, Jeff, like a book. I suddenly realised he could. And that's what's happening here. So Abraham realises there's incredible risk here that if he doesn't tithe, he's saying to the world, I'm a self-made man. Pretty good, eh? 318 verses 20. He will take credit for what is the actions of God. And so he tithes so that first things first, God knows that Abraham knows he is conspicuous. A transparent book that can be read by God. Melchizedek is just supplying the stage props. He's just the opportunity. But who is Abraham really speaking to? He's speaking to God. He's telling God that he attributes his success solely to the Creator, the Most High. And it's fascinating. Just digress on tithing. I never preach on tithing, and you're not getting a message on tithing this morning. I've never pressured any of my churches into giving money. Never had to. And we've been down on our luck at times as people, and particularly in the rural churches. But it's because it's not a New Testament thing. It's not a pointless legalism. You don't tithe because, we did a thing on that in church membership class and Baptist tithe. And, so I'm a Baptist, so I better tithe. It's not magic. You don't tithe so that God will love you more or make things more successful. There's no machinery like that. The New Testament is silent on this issue, but it speaks far more profoundly. In the New Testament, we read this. We don't give a portion. When Christ redeems us, makes covenant with us, makes us his own, Paul finishes his great manifesto of Romans at the pinnacle point. He says, and we read this a couple of weeks ago, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers or brethren, by the mercies of God, because of all that God has done, his initiative, to present what? Your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your, notice some versions have spiritual, the word is logikos. It actually means reasonable. It's only fair in the light of all that the God of heaven has done, in the light of his condescension to step into the world and take your sin upon his shoulders, in the light of that speech act of God. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. That is worship. And it's reasonable if you have God in perspective. What does it mean to present your bodies? He's not talking about your anatomy, flesh and blood. He's talking about your identity, all you are. Present your abilities to God, because he gave them to you. Present your achievements to God. And then go and present your aspirations to God, because he inspires them. All those things are what you give to God. That's how you live as a Christian. And tithing can be part of that. But the fascinating thing I find here is that when you have a discipline like tithing, which I find quite an anxious thing at times, particularly when my bank account doesn't really, it's not that impressive, to keep tithing. Mindfully tithing, not mechanically tithing, not legalistically, but mindfully to actually put aside part of my substance. It's a little discipline of my bodies, of my whole identity. And why do I do that? Not like the Pharisees, so that people might go, oh my goodness, pastor tithes. I do it because it changes me. It deepens me. It makes me more credible. Because I'm really making a little speech act at those moments where I'm saying to God, I know how transparent I really am, and this really is a discipline to trust that we're going to get through. We're going to make it. Because my future is in your hands. I'm not a self-made man. I'm made by God, for God. Well, I find that discipline really does change you. But then we have this other king arrive on the scene right then, and guess who he is? It's the king of Sodom. It's interesting that we miss out on the language here, but the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, those two names are actually words. They're plays on words. One is wickedness, the other's corruption. So, they were nicknames. Fancy. And here is Honourable King Rotten. That's the nature of this guy. Their reputation went before them in their names. And here old Rotten Guts suddenly appears. He's one of the guys who's run to the hills during the battle. And he appears, isn't this fascinating? And he pops up before Abraham, and he's basically saying, he gives Abraham this ambit claim, and he says, hey, how about you take the bling, I'll take the people. How's that? Sound like a good deal? Art of the deal. And now he knows that to the victor go the spoils. He wasn't part of this. He doesn't deserve to get anything. But he begins the deal right out of left field. It's an ambit claim. Now, it's fascinating that Abraham doesn't put him in his spot at that point, does he? He doesn't say, oh, no, I want a third of the people, half the... No, he doesn't get involved in that at all. This king, rotten, assumes that Abraham is made by the same stuff he is. That is, that he is motivated by short-term greed. Got a very low ceiling, this guy. And Abraham at that point corrects his theology. Did you notice what Abraham says? King of Sodom, Abraham says in verse 22, he says to the king of Sodom, with raised hand I have sworn an oath to the Lord. I've sworn on a stack of Bibles before I got here. Abram's already been projecting this situation would arise. He knows the temptation will be to parley for his share of the loot. And he says, I've made an oath to the Lord. What's the Lord? How do we translate that? Yahweh. Yahweh is the God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. He's corrected the theology of both kings in one hit. That I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or a strap or a sandal, that you'll never be able to say, I made Abram rich. Abram knows he's going to one day be the name on everyone's lips, and this guy will be drinking off Abram's celebrity. I made Abram rich. I gave him all the bling. He would have been nothing without me. And isn't it fascinating? What is Abraham doing? Abram is actually preventing that guy from being judged by God. Because this guy would be saying he would be taking credit for all this victory. King of Sodom. At the root of it, he's the sponsor. And this would make him the enemy of Yahweh. And Abram has learnt his lesson that Yahweh brooks no rivals. The law of God will not be bent. It will not be compromised. And God has a direct way of speaking through judging. That whole aspect of the active side of the living God's work of holy judgment. Abraham knows that too well. This guy doesn't at all. And so effectively he is not engaged in any of this because that is to bring the wrath of God upon the king of Sodom. And you know how the next chapters often end up. I find this a profound insight. I just can't get over how Abraham has grown to be able to think like this. His thinking has changed. He is now a reflex holy man. He obeys by reflex. It's no accident that he's been practicing the spiritual discipline of mindful transparency. He knows that God sees every thought, and every thought he thinks. He does know that he does not think in private. There is always an audience of one who sees every thought. And that's where Abram lives now. That, my friend, is risky. And Abraham actually is stopping the risk being paid by Sodom. Years ago, I, to finish, had a little young guys Bible study. I think it was when I was a teacher, and there was a bunch of guys. We all were part of the same parachurch group, and we met just for a little bit, for 35, 45 minutes once a week. And we'd simply go around and share what we'd been blessed by when we read the Bible, if we had any particular needs. There was one guy in the group, Martin. He would come with one prayer request. He'd graduated recently with a science degree, and over the next 18 months, he just couldn't get a job. I mean, any job. And each week we were praying the same thing. Martin would get a job, and nothing would happen. And thinking, what is it with this? I mean, people talk about arts degrees, but he must have chosen the wrong subject, so I don't know. But he just couldn't get a job. And he finally pulled down a job after about 18 months with a furniture store. And it was one that used to advertise in Melbourne. I'm not going to defame them. They do a well enough job, good a job at that themselves. He was the person on the telephone that when you rang up and you wanted to get a refund or replace the divan you'd bought or the chair you'd bought, the rocker you'd bought, when it was faulty, he had this list of clever questions where he could put the complainant off the scent. And he suddenly realised this is what he's being trained for, how to void the contract. And after a month or two of this, first job he's ever had, he just can't stomach this. And he took his contract in to the boss, and they took the question sheet that he had, all these clever questions you could always ask. Did the cat sit on the mat? And he put it down on the boss's desk. And he said to the boss, who was a busy man, he said, I get the impression that despite our advertising, we never have any intention of keeping our promise with the customer. And the boss just looked up, it took you a long time to work that out, pal. Just a word of advice. If you want to keep your job, you just head back to those phones and leave me to worry about those things. And this guy, right at that point, came out with the words of the morning. That's not a job. And he dumped his contract and he walked out. I met him not long after that, mulling around in the city. I don't know why I went to the city. I toured a long way away. I just came to the city one day in the middle of the week, bumped into my friend Martin, where we sat on a window, and he just told me this story. Now, that's not the end of the story. It's a little action. It's an acted speech that he did there. I'm not motivated. The boss knew at this time, when he did that day, that Martin wasn't made of the same stuff he was. He wasn't motivated by greed, and he knew that there was a God in the universe who was more mighty than the almighty dollar. And here's a man demonstrating it. It's no accident that this guy ends up having a parachurch and then a church ministry of 30 years where he is a pastor of significant sending churches in this city. He's just retired so that he can plant more churches more freely. Where did he develop that character? It wasn't in theological college, I can tell you that. He developed that character in obscurity. When he had that developed sense of transparency, that God could read him like a book. And he drank that well dry and became the man, the solid self that God could use. Each of us this day, we're all heading for a fork in the road where there are going to be two options. The option of cowardly compromise or crystal clear, calm courage. And you can't choose the fork you will take if you haven't developed the reflex. It'll be automatic if you have, that you'll choose the way of the God who is the Creator. The hour comes. The road lies ahead. Are you ready for the hour? Let's pray. Our blessed Lord and God, we thank you for bringing us into the family of Jesus Christ, the one high true God. In a world that is full of rottenness and chaos and conflict, you've deliberately placed us to be beacons of the truth of the one true God. We bless you, Lord, that you've not given up on the world, but you've developed this guy Abram from whom we all descend by faith. We thank you for the great privilege of being those people in the world, that the world will know that there is a God who reigns when they see the way we live, when they see the tune to which we dance, and they see the message spelt out by our own behaviours. Lord, keep our feet to the flame, keep us aware of those little mind games that would teach us the false way, but train in us instead, Lord, the true way of transparency. For Jesus' sake we pray. Amen.